Hello there. The UK Armed Forces Chief has put his head above the parapet and said that the Armed Forces are not a spare capacity for strikes. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, click the little bell, select all, and then like and comment below. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin told The Telegraph that although the potential strike cover by armed service personnel being proposed would not impact on operations, it would be slightly perilous to do so routinely. We're not spare capacity. We're busy and we're doing lots of things on behalf of the nation. We've got to focus on our primary role, he said. And the unions are not going to be happy with military intervention if it blunts their efforts to get the biggest pay award they can for their members. The unions might be rather upset about the concept of military aid to the civil authorities and see this as a sort of strike breaking. Until they need soldiers to fill sandbags to protect their properties from floods, maybe. But the UK has become used to the army being the first port of call backstop these days. Now I have to assume that prior to agreeing to being interviewed, Admiral Radakin, the Chief of the Defence Staff, would have had to have cleared it with his political masters. This comes as 1,200 Armed Forces personnel are being trained up to drive ambulances and take over from Border Force in the upcoming strike periods. And the article says that 2,500 personnel have been identified as being available to provide military aid to the civil authorities if needed. Now, as of July this year, the UK had a total number of Royal Navy, Royal Marine, British Army and Royal Air Force personnel of 193,890, including reserves. And remember, the reserves have day jobs. Wonder if some of them are Border Force or ambulance drivers. Now that would be a conflict of interest, wouldn't it? That's 39,860 from the RN and RM, 116,340 from the Army and 37,690 from the Royal Air Force. When looking at regular forces without reserves, this drops to 146,270 overall, with 33,750 from the RN and RM, 79,380 from the Army and 33,140 from the RAF. So on a regular service personnel basis, that makes the total just 0.2% of the population of the country. And these people have demanding core day jobs to do. And now compare those numbers with the 704,520 registered nurses we had in the UK as of March this year. And in 2021, we had 32,600 paramedics. Now add in the potential for the firefighter strikes and you get the picture. This just shows you how small the UK Armed Forces have become over the decades since the misguided peace dividend slashes to defence spending since the end of the Cold War. A decade ago, in 2012 for example, the total UK Armed Forces stood at 180,000 personnel. We now have 82% of that number. That is, the number has dropped by 18%, while the official UK population number has increased by about 6%. Now, when Radakin says that other operations will continue successfully as planned, despite standing in for the strikers, I'm assuming that will be on the back of cancelling Christmas leave for many and postponing some training in the hope of catching up on this later on down the line. And don't get me started on the pay difference between the soldiers standing in for the relatively better paid strikers wanting more. Now, as I've pointed out before, when this blows over and the Treasury once again gropes about for savings, some bright spark will look back and point out that the armed forces were able to find a slack in their system of 2,500 personnel to cover the strikes. And guess what? Out will go the redundancy notices. And as one unnamed military figure told the Telegraph, the government's answer when things get sticky is to use the armed forces in non-traditional roles, but when it rolls round to pay reviews, it never seems to be reflected. Sounds about right when handing out the rewards to a dedicated body that swears allegiance to the crown and cannot go on strike, or even breathe a word of dissent. Now, as I pointed out at the start, the Chief of the Defence Staff would not be raising his concerns without political top cover. But why does it take a serving officer to state the obvious when we have so many politicians available? That's their job. And I'm wondering if this isn't all about managing our expectations, with the message being, when the strikes really bite, we can't expect tens of thousands of troops to suddenly appear and fill the gaps, because they don't exist. Now the UK population grows to a new record level every single day, and if you believe the hype, that means the UK tax base gets a record new high every day. But there is still never any money for the number one government priority of defending the nation and its people, or rewarding those that are prepared to and do put their lives on the line. But there's plenty of money for white elephant projects like HS2 and failed net zero plans, as well as for bolstering the bank accounts of foreign despots and those of certain politicians and their chums. And when Radakin says the armed forces should not be regarded as instant spare capacity to fill all the gaps, well, I fear that the politicians without any military experience, and that's the vast majority of them, would argue otherwise. Now, filling in when you have spare capacity is fine, but I would argue those days have long passed, and at some point something will break. But don't worry, people, it will all change completely at the next general election when the voters once again elect the same old tired political parties and politicians, won't it? Vladimir Putin must now be concerned that George Orwell's book 1984 has become the best-selling e-book in Russia. Maybe Russians are cottoning on to the parallels between Orwell's warnings and how things have been developing in their own country. 1984 had previously banned in the old USSR until 1988, but now the Russian satellite state of Belarus seems to be one step ahead of the new power curve here, having already banned the book on May the 19th this year. With BookRiot.com reporting that one publishing house in Minsk was visited by pro-government journalists and later police who confiscated 200 books, including from their apartment, and detained the publishers. With the rise of the WEF agenda and the like, coupled with political parties that are becoming more and more detached from the people, turning the whole country into a virtual Room 101 with lockdowns and net zero, maybe it's time for 1984 to become the #1 bestseller here in the UK. And finally, when subscribing, please don't forget to press that little bell and also select the all option, or you won't get any notifications when I publish a new video. And thank you all so much for taking the time to watch the show.